The cock crowed thrice, dragging the morning into the sleepy village of Umidum. Smoke curled lazily from thatched kitchens, and the scent of roasted yam drifted across compounds. The morning was alive with sounds. Women pounding fufu in wooden mortars, children chasing each other with bare feet, slapping the red earth, and men hurrying off to their farms with hoes balanced on their shoulders. In the midst of this rhythm lived Ngozi, a woman everyone in the village respected for her calmness and humility. She was not just another woman in Umidum. Her beauty was the type that did not shout but whispered. She walked with quiet confidence, her steps measured, her voice soft, and her manner respectful. People often wondered why such a woman, whose skin glowed like fresh palm oil under the sun, had chosen to live so modestly. Ngozi had a secret, one that no villager suspected. She was the daughter of the late Chief Izia, a man whose wealth stretched across farmlands, palm oil factories, and multiple properties in Onitsha and Enugu. At his death, he had left behind an estate that could keep generations comfortable. But Ngozi, unlike many children of rich men, chose a different path. She had watched her father's wealth attract parasites, men who approached her with honeyed words, eyes not on her heart, but on the fortune her surname commanded. They spoke of love, but counted her father's lands. They made promises, but gazed at the heavy gold necklaces she wore. That was when she made a vow. I will hide my wealth until I meet a man who loves me for who I am, not for what I have. And so she stripped herself of all visible signs of riches. She wore simple wrappers, cooked her own food, and lived quietly. It was during this season of disguise that she met Obinna. Obinna was a tall, handsome man with a commanding voice. He carried himself with pride, shoulders squared as though the world owed him respect. To many in the village, he was promising. He spoke English with flair, boasted of his little job in a local company, and dreamed loudly of becoming someone great. When Obinna courted Ngozi, he didn't know the woman before him was wealthy beyond his imagination. He saw her as a simple woman, humble, poor, and desperate for love. And to Ngozi, that was perfect. She thought she had found a man who loved her purely, stripped of all illusions of money. She married him quietly, with little fanfare, and moved into his modest compound. For the first few years, peace lived between them. Ngozi cooked his meals, washed his clothes, and treated him with respect that made the elders nod in approval. People often whispered, that Obinna is lucky. His wife is like gold, humble and beautiful. But time has a way of testing everything. As the years rolled by, Obinna began to change. At first, it was subtle, the late nights, the sudden coldness, the excuses that stretched into lies. Then it became bold, the harsh words, the neglect, the absence of affection. Ngozi would sit in their compound at night, her wrapper tied tightly around her chest, and stare at the moon as questions pressed her heart. What have I done wrong? Why is Obinna changing? Does he no longer love me? She never imagined the answer was another woman. One evening, Obinna walked into the house with an unusual air of authority. His voice carried arrogance, and his eyes glinted with cruelty. Ngozi, he said, dropping his bag carelessly. I have something to tell you. Ngozi, kneeling as she served his meal, looked up with her usual gentle smile. Yes, my husband. I am listening. Obinna cleared his throat, adjusted his chair, and said words that sliced into Ngozi's soul. I am getting a second wife. You have no choice in the matter. If you don't like it, leave. But remember, you are poor. How will you cope if you go? You have no father, no money, nothing. Stay here and live with it, or walk out and suffer. The room went still. The words hung in the air like thunder that refused to roll away. Ngozi's hands trembled. Her heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to remind him of the love they once shared, but her tongue refused. She realized at that moment, the man she thought chose her for love had only been waiting for wealth to reveal itself. And now, he had shown his true self. Obinna leaned back in his chair, a mocking smile on his lips. If you walk out, remember, don't come crawling back. Because if I change my mind and allow you back, I will chase you out like a dog. That night, Ngozi cried silently. But in the midst of her tears, something broke inside her. Not weakness, but a new strength. She thought of her late father, of the inheritance she had hidden, of the estates that bore her family's name. She remembered the promise she had made to herself to marry for love, not money. Now she knew the truth. Obinna had failed the test. At dawn, while the village was still asleep, Ngozi packed her small box of clothes. She tied her wrapper, lifted her chin, and walked out of Obinna's compound. He laughed loudly as she left, his voice echoing in the early morning air. You will return. Mark my words, Ngozi. You will beg to come back. And when you do, I will disgrace you. Ngozi did not look back. What Obinna did not know was that his downfall had already begun. The sun had risen with pride over Umidam, spilling its light on the orange rooftops and stretching its warmth across the farmlands. Roosters crowed from distant compounds, and the chatter of women carrying calabashes of water filled the dusty paths. In one corner of the village, a man whistled happily as he swept his compound, while another sharpened his machete for farm work. But in Obinna's compound, the air carried a different rhythm. His new wife-to-be, Amaka, was bustling about, humming with excitement. Her voice was loud, her laughter even louder, and she walked as if the earth belonged to her. She had captured Obinna's heart, or rather, she had captured his vanity. Amaka was everything Ngozi was not in his eyes: flashy, bold, and ambitious. She wasn't the kind to sit quietly and serve with humility. She painted her lips red, wore tight-fitting wrappers, and spoke with arrogance that matched Obinna's swelling pride. Together, they fed each other's ego, believing they were rising higher than anyone else in Umidam. It was Amaka who first suggested the idea. My husband-to-be, she said one evening, leaning into Obinna's chest as they shared palm wine. Why don't we invite your first wife to our wedding? Let her see how useless she is. Let her see that you chose a real woman, not a beggar like her. Obinna's laughter shook the room. Ngozi? That poor girl. Huh. My dear, you are wicked. He slapped his thigh and laughed harder. Yes, let her come. Let her watch me marry a woman of worth. Maybe she will even collapse from shame. So the invitation was sent. When Ngozi received the news, she was at her father's old house in Enugu, where she had quietly relocated after leaving Obinna. The compound stood wide and elegant, with mango trees shading the entrance and tall iron gates that swung open with authority. It had been years since she stepped into this part of her life, but now, with the keys in her hands, she felt as though her father's spirit was whispering, "Welcome home, my daughter. The time has come." Ngozi had spent weeks in silence, healing from the wound Obinna's words had left. But now, as she stood in the grand sitting room surrounded by portraits of her late father and shelves stacked with files of property deeds, she felt something new stirring within her: power. Her father had left her more than wealth. He had left her a legacy, a name that opened doors, a reputation that commanded respect across the eastern region. The invitation from Obinna and Amaka might have been sent to mock her, but Ngozi saw it differently. It is time, she thought. Let them see who I truly am. The day of the wedding came with noise and celebration. Drummers beat their talking drums at the village square, singers lifted their voices in praise songs, and women danced with rattles tied to their ankles. Obinna had spared no expense to make the occasion grand. He wore a flowing white agbada trimmed with gold, while Amaka shone in beads and coral jewelry, her head tie towering like a crown. Guests gathered from neighboring villages. The square was filled with laughter, gossip, and the smell of roasted goat meat. Everyone waited for the moment Obinna would present his new wife, and secretly, they also waited to see if the rumor was true, that he had invited his first wife just to mock her. At the height of the celebration, a hush fell over the crowd. A sleek convoy of black cars rolled into the village square, their tires crushing the red earth. The people gasped. No one in Umidam had ever seen such cars before. The doors opened, and men in well-tailored suits stepped out, adjusting their sunglasses. Then, from the middle car, Ngozi emerged. She was radiant. Her wrapper was rich George fabric, glittering under the sun. Gold jewelry adorned her neck and wrists, but it was her carriage that silenced the crowd. She walked with grace, her chin lifted, her eyes calm but commanding. Behind her, assistants carried designer bags and gifts wrapped in velvet cloth. At first, Obinna and Amaka burst into laughter. Hey, she borrowed clothes. Amaka sneered loudly. Ngozi wants to show herself. But the laughter died when the master of ceremony, a respected elder, cleared his throat and said in a booming voice, "Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Madame Ngozi Izia, daughter of the late Chief Izia, the great businessman of Enugu and Onitsha, owner of palm oil estates, factories, and countless properties. Her name commands respect across Igboland. The crowd erupted in shock. Mouths fell open. Women covered their lips with both hands. Men shook their heads in disbelief. And then, the final blow landed. Let us also remember, the elder continued, that Obinna here was once a worker under Chief Izia before he died. That means Obinna has been working for Madame Ngozi all these years, without even knowing it. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Obinna's face drained of color. His knees felt weak. Amaka's mouth hung open, unable to close. Every guest turned to look at them with mocking eyes. The very plan they had designed to disgrace Ngozi had flipped and exposed their own foolishness. Ngozi did not speak. She only smiled politely, walked to a reserved seat at the front, and sat like a queen. The drummers, sensing the shift, changed their rhythm to songs of praise for her father's name. Obinna wanted the ground to open and swallow him. That day marked the beginning of his downfall. Obinna woke the morning after his wedding to a silence that felt like judgment. The drums had stopped, the laughter had died, and the village square was empty. Only the echo of shame still hung in the air like smoke that refused to scatter. He lay on his raffia bed mat, staring at the ceiling. His chest rose and fell heavily, each breath weighed down by what had happened. Images of Ngozi, radiant and untouchable, kept flashing in his mind. He had wanted her to come crawling in rags. Instead, she came like a queen. He had wanted the crowd to laugh at her. Instead, they laughed at him. When he finally dragged himself out of bed, Amaka was already in the kitchen, banging pots and muttering curses under her breath. She had removed her wedding beads the night before and thrown them across the room. "Can you imagine the disgrace?" she hissed as soon as she saw him. "Your so-called poor wife walked in like a goddess. Do you know how the women mocked me after you left the square? They said I am only enjoying leftover yam peel, while Ngozi is feasting on the real tuber." Obinna clenched his fists. "Shut up, Amaka. Is it my fault? How was I to know that Ngozi is Chief Izia's daughter? She deceived me. She pretended to be poor." Amaka dropped the wooden spoon she was holding and turned sharply. "And you, what does that make you? A fool. You couldn't see what was in front of you. Instead, you ran after me, thinking you had found better. Now see where it has landed us. The whole village is laughing at us." The argument continued until their voices carried across the compound. Neighbors whispered among themselves, shaking their heads. "See Obinna and his new wife," they said. "They have started fighting already. This is only the beginning." Days passed, but peace did not return to Obinna's household. The shame followed him everywhere like a shadow that would not lift. At the company office in Enugu, where he worked as a mid-level supervisor, whispers trailed him in the hallways. Colleagues, who once envied his loud confidence, now laughed behind his back. "Nah so life be," one clerk murmured. "He left a gold mine for sand. See him now, ordinary Sunday chokam." Worse still, Ngozi had quietly resumed her rightful position as the true heir of Chief Izia's estate. Her name was now stamped on every document, her signature on every paycheck. By law, by blood, by legacy, she was the boss. One Monday morning, Obinna entered the office and froze. Ngozi was sitting at the head of the boardroom table, dressed in a navy blue business suit. Her presence filled the room with authority. The staff stood up to greet her, their voices respectful. "Good morning, madam." Obinna swallowed hard and forced his legs to move. His pride screamed at him to walk out, but his fear of poverty kept him rooted. Ngozi lifted her eyes, calm and controlled. "Good morning, Obinna," she said. Her voice carried no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet power that pierced deeper than insults. Obinna bent slightly, his voice trembling. "Good morning, ma." The word ma burned his tongue like hot pepper. But he had no choice. His colleagues chuckled softly, pretending to cough to hide their laughter. For the first time in his life, Obinna tasted humiliation in its rawest form. At home, life with Amaka quickly turned sour. The woman who once laughed boldly now nagged from morning till night. She wanted money for clothes, money for food, money for luxuries she thought marriage to Obinna would provide. But Obinna's pocket was thinning. His debts grew heavier. Even the little respect he once commanded in the office was gone. One night, after a heated quarrel, Amaka spat the words he dreaded most. "If I had known Ngozi was Chief Izia's daughter, I would have left you and followed her. She is the real gold, and you are nothing but dust." The insult cut him deeply. He slapped her in anger, but instead of silence, Amaka screamed louder, cursing him and threatening to leave. From then on, peace became a stranger in their house. Meanwhile, Ngozi flourished. She moved gracefully into her inheritance, attending business meetings across Enugu and Onitsha, where her father's name still opened doors. Men and women respected her, not just for her wealth, but for her wisdom. She handled workers with fairness, gave generously to the poor, and carried herself with dignity that reminded people of her father. And yet, Ngozi's heart was not bitter. Though Obinna had wounded her deeply, she did not waste her days plotting revenge. Life itself was dealing him the blows she could never have imagined. But fate was not finished with Obinna. One afternoon, the company board gathered. Ngozi had called for a restructuring. Positions would be reassigned, and only the competent would keep their roles. The meeting was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Ngozi's voice rang clear as she read from the list. "Obinna," she paused, her eyes locking on him. The silence was heavy. Sweat rolled down his forehead. "Your position as supervisor will no longer be needed. However," she continued smoothly, "there is an opening for a cleaner. If you are interested, you may apply." The room exploded in murmurs. Some gasped. Others laughed quietly. Obinna felt the ground shift beneath his feet. A cleaner? Him? The same man who once boasted that no woman could survive without him? The same man who mocked Ngozi and called her poor? His pride screamed to reject it, but his reality, Amaka's constant demands, their newborn baby crying at night, the debts choking him, left him no choice. I will take it," he muttered, his voice breaking. Ngozi simply nodded. "Very well." And so, Obinna began sweeping floors, emptying trash cans, and scrubbing toilets in the very company he once commanded, bowing his head each morning to greet his ex-wife. "Good morning, Ma." It was the taste of ashes, bitter and endless. The days that followed were heavy with lessons for Obinna. No longer did he stride into the company like a man of authority. Instead, he shuffled in quietly, broom in hand, eyes lowered to avoid the mocking glances of junior staff who once bowed before him. "Obinna, sweep that corner well," a young secretary called one morning, snapping her fingers as though addressing a servant. "Yes, Ma," he replied, his voice tight with bitterness. The word Ma had become his daily bread, words he now repeated not only to his ex-wife, Ngozi, but to everyone in the office who had risen higher than him. At home, things were no better. Amaka, once proud and flashy, now carried the bitterness of unmet expectations. She scolded Obinna daily. "You are useless," she would shout, slamming plates on the table. "You tricked me into suffering. Look at Ngozi, see how she shines, while I am here washing rags. If I had known, I would have joined her and left you in the dust." Their newborn baby cried endlessly, as though sensing the chaos of the house. With money scarce and tension high, peace became a forgotten visitor. Obinna spent nights staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how quickly life had turned against him. While Obinna's life crumbled, Ngozi's world was blooming in ways she had never imagined. One bright Thursday morning, she traveled to Lagos for a high-level business meeting. The hall was filled with men in suits and women in fine Ankara gowns, their conversations buzzing about investments, real estate, and oil ventures. Ngozi walked in, confident, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. As she settled into her seat, her eyes met those of a man across the table. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a sharp Italian suit. His presence commanded respect, but his smile carried warmth. His name was Chief Chukwudi Okafor, a billionaire businessman known across Nigeria. Throughout the meeting, their eyes met again and again. He listened keenly when she spoke, nodding with admiration at her intelligence. When the session ended, he walked straight to her. "Madam Ngozi," he said, extending his hand. "I must confess, I am impressed. Your father was a man I respected greatly, and today, I see his wisdom alive in you." Ngozi smiled, shaking his hand. "Thank you, Chief. My father taught me that wealth without wisdom is like rain without clouds, empty." That one conversation bloomed into many more. Soon, business meetings turned into private dinners, dinners into laughter, and laughter into something deeper. For the first time since Obina's betrayal, Ngozi felt her heart soften. She saw in Chikwudi not just wealth, but sincerity, companionship, and respect. Months later, they were married in a ceremony so grand it made headlines across the region. Dignitaries came, musicians sang, and guests feasted. Ngozi, radiant in white lace and coral beads, walked into her new life, not as a woman abandoned, but as a woman restored. Obina, however, was not spared the pain of witnessing her happiness. Each morning, as he bent to mop the floors in the company office, he overheard the workers gossiping. "Have you heard? Madam Ngozi married Chief Okafor. The wedding was like a king's feast." "Huh, our Oga cleaner must be crying blood." Their laughter stabbed at him, but he could not protest. He would only squeeze his rag tighter and keep scrubbing, his heart heavy with regret. At home, Amaka's torment grew unbearable. She taunted him daily. "Your first wife has married a billionaire, and you are here smelling of mop water. Tell me, Obina, is this the greatness you once boasted of?" "Foolish man." The baby cried louder. The debts piled higher, and the nights stretched longer. Obina realized too late that he had thrown away gold for gravel, love for lust, peace for torment. For Ngozi, life moved forward like a calm river. Her businesses expanded under Chief Okafor's guidance. Her name grew across Nigeria, and her heart healed completely. She lived not in bitterness, but in quiet gratitude, knowing she had been spared from a life of misery. Sometimes, when her car drove past the company where Obina now worked as a cleaner, she would glance out of the tinted window and see him bent with a broom, sweat dripping down his face. Their eyes would meet briefly, but she never lingered. She would simply look ahead and allow her driver to move on. She had no words for him, because life itself had already spoken. In Umidam, the story of Obina and Ngozi became a parable told in hushed voices around firesides. Mothers warned their sons and daughters. "Do not despise humility, for behind it may hide greatness. Do not mock love, for it is stronger than riches. And never let pride blind you, or you will bow before the very person you once despised." Ngozi lived happily, her days filled with purpose and honor. Obina, meanwhile, remained a cleaner, haunted by the sight of the woman he once threw away, now untouchable, now greater than he could ever dream. And so the tables turned, and the lesson was sealed. Love, humility, and truth will always outshine arrogance and greed.